Fire for your mind. The kosher clinician.
Yes, someone's knocking at the door, so let's let in the kosher clinician. Welcome, Mr. Kosher Clinician. Welcome in.
Hello.
Hi, what's going on, guys? How you guys doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
Very well.
Very well.
Right. So this is a very poignant conversation as we talk about, or more or less juxtapose, the importance of marriage and relationship and legacy. And as a clinical therapist, you know, the last stage in psychosocial development actually is centered around ego integrity versus despair. Ego integrity says more or less that I've done everything I need to do to carry on the legacy for my family and my children. But despair is when you're on your deathbed, when you're more or less gesticulating mentally about the pain and the peril of not living your life at its fullness. And, you know, I decided to do what I'm doing as a clinical therapist to empower men, because I don't feel that men in America, especially men of color, but all men, are getting the proper outcomes that are needed to help them become sustainable. Amira, you talked about the terminology called help me. When a man gets a very feminine woman, she becomes a vibration for that man, an oscillator, to say the least. And when that woman is oscillating her femininity, that man becomes the best version of himself. But the caveat is that most men in America don't get that, because some of our women, not all, of Western women, come into a relationship expecting to be served instead of ready to serve that man. And because of that, there becomes a chasm in the relationship, because both parties are not on the same page. And so, you know, I tell men to go where they're celebrated versus being tolerated. And you know, I think a lot of American men are doing that because most men feel like, in the contextual framework of America, that America is not a viable commodity for most men. So they don't see it as something valuable, in my opinion. You know, the lady, Dr. Helen Smith, wrote a book called Men on Strike. And so the ground is fallow. The ground needs to be broken up. But when you have caustic policies like feminism that have more or less destroyed the fabric of the minds of so many men are more or less taking their time before they enter into a relationship, because they know once they enter into that relationship, it can be very deleterious to their soul, mind, body, and spirit. So in theory, is marriage a good potential, good option? Yes, I think marriage is a beautiful idea.
I do too.
But the current climate that we live in, I don't feel like many of our women are wife ready to more or less meet the needs of their husbands. I think, you know, American men are excellent. You know, I came back from Brazil doing some anthropological work and touring. And in other countries, the women are conditioned to serve their men, and they respect their men. And, you know, I love the analogy that you gave about him being the pilot and she being the flight attendant. And, you know, the co-pilot concept is not bad either. But the problem with most Americans, they tend to do things based on the egalitarian construct, which is a westernized thought. And because of that egalitarian construct, many men are jousting in relationship with their women. And so in olden times, under patriarchal cultures, there was no such thing as jousting. When women came into men's spaces, they remained silent and they listened and respected those men. But so many of our women say they want chivalry, but patriarchy is a byproduct of chivalry. Men determine the
Can you repeat that one more time, Mr.
I said, yes, patriarchy is a byproduct of chivalry. And so men determine what they determine to be a prize. I hear some of the women say, oh, I'm the prize. But no, you're not the prize. You're the prize if he deemed you to be the prize. Amir, I created a term called the prize catcher. And the prize catcher more or less says that, similar to in the gospel, where the bride prepared herself for the bridegroom. So the man is the prize catcher. If he sees an inherent worth of value in that woman, he will catch her and make her his prize. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh.
Oh, goodness.
But the problem there with so many women that come into relationships, they come in thinking that they're the prize and that they're doing the man a favor, which in essence, in cultures from the past, women knew that they had to serve a man in order to get the ring. The ring was synonymous that she was wife ready and she was willing to serve her man. But unfortunately, in the current confines of America, we don't have those safeguards in place. America is more of a gynocracy or a matriarchy. And because of that, many men have been conditioned to become subjects of their women instead of demanding power, which has been a detriment to their minds, in my opinion.
Whew.
Wow, you got the fire. Like,
Wait, I need like an amen, meme, like soundtrack, something. I need something. JR, we don't have an applause. We have to get something here because that is.
Thank you, ladies.
But you know, I was expecting nothing less because every
yes.
time you come on, you always come. Look, my hair is already messed up. Even my hair got messed up. Wow. Okay.
Well, right, because men want to be inspired, and I don't live by the zodiac, but I'm a Leo, by the way. So my motto is fire for your mind, and so men want to be inspired. I tell women when they give men feminine energy is so contagious. It can take a man to his highest height when she's genuinely feminine. The problem is that we have something, Amira and Miss Barrett, called the chameleon effect. Many women come into these spaces, they're not genuine, they're chameleons. And so they have never seen masculinity like yourself. You were more or less trained in a patriarchal culture where the women respected their men. And sadly, in many of those patriarchal cultures, and I'm not advocating violence, there's a penalty for being out of line. So many women get offended by the word submission and obey, but that was a mandate of the gospel. The book of Titus said, wives, obey your husbands. That's the gospel. But some women say that they are Christians, but I'm like, how can you be a Christian when the gospel is very clear about where it says obey? Obedience does not mean that a man abuse power. It does not mean that. I'm not talking about men that abuse power, use their wives as, like, be quiet, shut up. That's wrong. That's an abuse of power. Mm-hmm. But I'm talking about she's willing to work with her man to help build not only a legacy, but she's willing to work with her man to help him become the best version of himself. In the African-American community, Teddy Pendergrass said that you inspire me. And so when men are inspired, they're at their best. But when that man is around a feminine woman, it does something to his psyche, but also to his body, which in essence make him productive. And so I tell women, Amira and Miss Barrett, that women have more power than they really know if they're really genuine. Delilah knew about it. Delilah got the strongest man to tell him his secrets because she used her feminine graces. Even though she was deceptive, she was able to use her feminine demure and charm to get the secrets of the strongest man in the world at that time. So women have the power, but you must be genuine in your approach because men become broken when they're impacted by a woman. The imprint of a man is a woman, but it happens to him mentally. A man is most vulnerable when he's been imprinted by a woman that he thought was genuine, where a woman is more vulnerable when she's pregnant. When she's been impregnated by a man, she's very vulnerable. Well, men are vulnerable mentally. And so once those men realize that what they had in their head is not the truth, they go through what's called a catharsis, or what we call red pill rage. And then it starts the 5 stages of grief. And many times men vacillate between denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So they go to this catharsis over and over again, and many don't get the help that they need, which in essence turns to an implosion, which becomes an explosion. And that's why you have so many men that are angry, using very terse language in these spaces because they're angry. And so some say, well, just get over and heal. Well, you can't heal when you've been told a lie for so many years. Men are conditioned to think women are sugar and spice and everything nice. But when they come to that great conniption, it does something very damaging to their mind. And so it's almost like the Madonna whore complex. Men see women as beautiful and great, but men are beginning to see that women are just human. They're just human. Nothing more.
Yeah, the delusion is going away. The illusion is going away. Like there used to be before where women were these soft, feminine things, and honestly, they played the part as well. They didn't act out of that character, but now we see that women are exposing themselves for what they really are, and just I don't know if it's the problem of the internet, because maybe the internet is just too tempting for women to just turn on the camera and expose themselves as the worst of the worst. Maybe before, because we didn't have the internet, it was all kind of hidden and it was secretive, and it was only if you knew somebody who knew somebody, you had to go through an alley with a door you had to knock 3 times. I don't know, but it's just, I understand.
Well, a lot of it's negative socialization and negative conditioning. It's a constant battle between nature and nurture. And so American men have been conditioned to be subjugates to women, since, they there was a time when men had standards, but men now just take anything. And so what the internet has done is given a lot of women a false perception of what their worth is. They think that because 100 men in their DMs that they are valuable, but no, many of those men are simps. or many of those men just want to have sex with you. They're not really taking you serious for a wife. You might find a few, but the men that want to be your wife, you don't see them as worthy. And so it's giving some of our women, not all, shout out to the good women that are good, great, but it's giving them a false sense of superiority. But then they come to a great conniption when they realize that some of those men or those 100 guys in their DMs just want them for sex. And so I think a lot of times women have a struggle with understanding that a man can have sex with you, but it doesn't mean that he wants you for a wife. And that's the big difference.